Dear students, in this lesson we learn the techniques of teaching Braille. Teaching Braille to young blind students is more than just teaching them the meanings of Braille symbols. Young blind children learn to read using Braille just as young sighted children learn to read using print. Both blind and sighted children are learning the meanings of symbolic representations such as print and Braille characters and how those representations from words, sentences, paragraphs and so on, which when put together communicate a unique message. Many teaching methods which work for sighted children can also work for blind children, possibly with some modifications. Choosing the method or combination of methods which best suits the student's needs is critical to the student's success in learning to read. There are certain principles of reading instruction. During recent years, methods of reading instructions have become more student-centered, fostering not only knowledge and ability but also independence. It is vital for students to have a strong knowledge base when they begin to learn to read. Children who do not have a strong knowledge of environment and concept about print will experience reading problems which may endure. These include comprehension problems, decoding problems, and problems with vocabulary. Blind children may have deficits in concept development because of their inability to observe the same things naturally that their sighted peers observe. Addressing these areas during the early literacy period or during remediation is crucial. Several factors influence the teaching of reading in Braille. Some things to remember when planning instructional strategies include the individual self rather than the whole word is usually considered to be the perceptual unit. The shape or arrangement of dots, not the number of dots, is critical to recognition of the Braille character. Braille readers use a synthetic approach, that is, they must recognize individual characters in a series, remember them, and then integrate them to read the whole word. Context and syntax clues are helpful for familiar material. Phonetic and structural analysis are better for difficult material. Reading rates may or may not be slower than those of print readers. It is also important to take into account any emotional factors or aspects of the environment which may be influencing the child's ability or willingness to read. Children who are depressed may use reading as an escape. On the other hand, they may experience difficulty because of low self-esteem. Children whose families have positive attitudes and realistically high expectations will be more likely to thrive and enjoy reading. Braille instruction. Determining how to teach Braille, including the frequency and intensity of instruction, depends on a variety of factors. The age of the student needs to be considered and whether they have other options for literary medium. The student's intellectual capabilities will determine if the focus should be on functional Braille or traditional Braille. The student's tactile and perceptual abilities and skills are critical to learning to read Braille. Students with a history of strokes may not have the finger sensitivity to discriminate the small differences in Braille characters. The student's age and additional disabilities will also play a large part in determining the way to instruct the student in Braille. Now let us discuss how to teach Braille reading. Braille reading program is designed to promote good two-handed reading. Research has shown that a few good Braille readers use only one hand, but a vast majority use two hands. A good Braille reader exhibits few regressive hand movements, either vertically or horizontally. He uses very little pressure when touching the Braille dots. He utilizes a two-handed reading technique in which the left hand locates the beginning of the next line while the right hand finishes reading the previous line. He uses at least 4 fingers at all time. He also demonstrates the ability to scan efficiently when reading both a vertical and horizontal format. He also demonstrates the ability to read letters accurately without confusing letters which are mirror image of other letters. If your student has a heavy touch, you can try some other techniques. Place a piece of paper on the table. Ask the student to pass his hands over the paper so slightly as not to move the paper. Another suggestion would be to place plastic disc or checkers on raised line graph paper and ask the student to pass his hands over the objects so lightly as not to move the objects across the lines on the graph paper. Create your own games which would encourage a light touch. Encourage your student to touch the dots lightly. Try to help him develop a smooth movement of his hands from left to right and try to avoid having student stop as he moves across the page. Suggest that your student keep all fingers in contact with the paper. It should be remembered, however, that some Braille readers have been known to use unorthodox hand positions efficiently. If your student displays dominant one-handed reading, it may take a long time to develop the coordination and motivation required for two-handed reading. Continue to instruct your student in two-handed method, but respect his right to experiment with other methods when he is working independently. It is important that the school furniture fit the student. The student's elbow should be on the same plane or perhaps a little higher than the top of the desk or table being used. Some beginning readers have little strength in their hands or arms. As a result, they may tire quickly. If this is a problem, you might try other activities. Have the student punch holes all the way around a heavy pieces of construction paper using a single hole punch. Have the student lace from one hole to another all the way around the border using medium weight yarn. As a reinforcer for work completed satisfactorily, let the student use nut cracker to crack nuts, after which he may eat them. Start with peanuts first. Cut strips of heavy construction paper about 2 inches wide. Have the student cut across the strips with scissors to make pieces of paper. The small pieces may be pasted down to decorate the folders. A box containing several dozen nuts and bolts of the same size may be given to the student to put together. Clean, warm hands are important for rapid and correct Braille reading. Be certain that your student washes hands, rinses them thoroughly, and uses a little hand lotion before beginning to read. Place the student's worksheets one at a time on top of the rubber pad. This prevents the paper from slipping around the desk and thereby promotes a light reading touch. Many adults think of Braille letters as reversible pads, that is, W and R. Never teach a child that there are reversible pads of letters in Braille. This requires that the student perform a double mental process when he applies his knowledge of letters to academic assignments. Remember that one of your greatest strengths is your ability to reinforce correct reading techniques. Reinforcing incorrect techniques only shows the student what is bad but offers no example of the desired behavior and thereby provides no substitute for the bad techniques. Reinforcing correct techniques provides an example of the goal behavior and increases the probability that the desired behavior will recur more frequently. Good reading skills are only mastered after years of practice. Praise your student for correct and hand position when it occurs. Remember that no program can effect maximum progress in a student without the support and enthusiasm of his teacher. I hope that you will find this program worthy of all your support and enthusiasm. The teacher should teach tracking patterns. It is important to teach correct finger and hand use when instructing a student in Braille. Different students will use different types of hand movement patterns to read Braille. The most efficient pattern is to use a scissor type pattern moving both hands together. The left hand reads to the middle of the line, then the right hand takes over and leads to the end of the line, while the left hand returns to the next line and begins to read independently of the right. The hands meet in the middle of the line of a Braille and then separate. Light finger touch is also critical for students to acquire. When teaching a student tracking patterns, encourage the student to locate the beginning and end of a raised line and then a Braille line. Alternatively, have students track along a line and locate items along the line. Track a raised solid on broken lines or straw, yarn, popsicle sticks, ribbon or textured paper from left to right using both hands. Alternatively, you may choose to begin by using a row of full Braille cells to track. Track from left to right across Braille symbols which have one or more spaces between them using both hands and moves from top to bottom of a page. You may choose to have the student track across a row full of Braille cells to discover each letter of their name at the end of the row. Encourage the student to track Braille sentences when read aloud by an adult. The teacher should discourage backtracking and scrubbing. It is important as a student is learning Braille to discourage regressive hand movements, vertical or horizontal. Regressive hand movements or scrubbing are those in which the hands and fingers move back and forth or up and down unnecessarily on the Braille line and interfere with the efficient tracking skills. In early literacy activities, these movements may indicate that the student needs additional practice in tracking lines while actually discriminating likeness and differences between characters and words. Backtracking is when the student returns to previously read characters if the text does not make sense. Although some backtracking is good and can be positive strategy, excessive backtracking can be an indication that the student is reading at the frustration level and the reading level should be re-evaluated. Also, the teacher should encourage light finger touch. Another mechanical skill a good Braille reader should develop to use very little pressure when touching the Braille dots. A student should touch lightly along the top of the Braille as they read it. If a child is observed to place too much pressure on fingertips, remind the child to use a light finger touch. If a child is pressing more heavily on the Braille characters to gain more tactile information, they may be compensating for a lack of discrimination skills. Work on the whole body relaxation. If your body is tense, your fingers will be unable to touch lightly. Place cotton balls beneath the child's fingers and have him move them across the page. Learn to tickle the dots, that is, touching the dots lightly, that it tickles the fingers. The teacher should encourage proper finger and hand position. Just as it is important to learn early how to properly hold a pencil or to use correct fingers when typing, it is important to learn proper finger and position when reading Braille. Although it is acceptable to go between your right or left index fingers, it is ideal to have a primary reading finger. Encourage the student to identify that each finger has a job. Lead finger, deductive fingers. Encourage the student to read tactile books using correct finger position. Encourage the student to use pointer finger as lead finger and use pinky finger to deduct the end of the line. Begin instruction by teaching the Braille cell. Learning the dot positions in the Braille cell is helpful but not essential for discriminating letters, numbers and punctuation. There are many strategies teachers have to use the spatial position and dot numbers of specific dots in Braille cell. Encourage the student to identify the one symbol that is different within the group of 3 symbols. two of which are identical. Encourage the students to match Braille configurations. Encourage the student to identify the space on a line of groups of Braille symbols, which one or more spaces between them. Encourage the student to identify the groups of symbols when given in a line of Braille symbols and groups of Braille symbols. Make Braille reading a fun. Write Braille notes to the student and place them in unexpected places to create interest and sense of excitement in using Braille. Later, the student can be encouraged to write notes to the teacher of students with visual impairments and others. Use Braille access technology such as computers and personal note takers as a motivating factor, as students can be motivated by the voice output. This is also a great way for a more advanced Braille reader who uses a personal note taker to have an opportunity to mentor and feel good about their Braille skills. How to improve Braille reading speed? There are many ways to improve Braille reading speed. The more reading the child does, the faster he will read. Some teachers use controlled exposure device to encourage children to build reading speed. Silent reading is one of the techniques. Encourages children not to move their lips while reading silently. Silent reading is often accomplished much more quickly than oral reading. Moving the lips limits the child to the number of words which can be spoken. In considering this approach, it is important to remember that comprehension may be valued or over speed. A student who reads 300 words per minute but cannot remember or understand what he has been read has no advantage over a student who reads 175 words per minute and remembers and understands what he has been read. Some students move their lips because they experience problems with attention and find that the extra source of exposure to the material helps them to retain it. Explaining various speeds of reading, it is important that students understand why they may want to read more slowly or quickly in various circumstances. Some students find it helpful to use both hands. However, recent discussions among professionals, parents, and blind adults have revealed that some people perceive characters in reverse when reading with two hands. In these cases, the person will read much more fluently with the preferred hand. Often, this is the non-dominant hand. Encourage the recreational reading. Students who read more will naturally become more skilled at it. There are a number of sources of recreational reading material for blind children. Teach children to turn pages quickly and to estimate instead of looking at every page number. Enter contest. Students enjoy competing and may be motivated to read and for rewards. Oral reading. Take turns reading. Read aloud in chorus. Do not always interrupt to correct errors. Students may correct their own errors. Read aloud on tape. About students with low vision, Braille is becoming an increasingly accepted option for students with low vision, especially those who rely on extremely large print. Many of these students are learning to use both media and to make choices about which are the best for a given situation. Teaching Braille to students with low vision successfully depends a great deal on the teacher, parents, and the student having a positive attitude about Braille. It is important that Braille not to be viewed as a symbol of weakness or as just for the blind people, but that as a tool which can empower people in situations when the use of large print is cumbersome or impractical. Holberg and Koenig emphasized the importance of using methods and materials which will motivate students with low vision to learn Braille. These methods and materials may include Braille menus and schedules, reading material which is relevant and of interest to the child, and correspondence with a pen pal. It is important to encourage students with low vision not to peek at the dots Many will try to read the Braille visually. This contributes to much slower reading. Willoughby and Tuffy recommended using blindfold to discourage peeking and provide suggestions on how to introduce them in a way which they report leads to little or no resistance. Psychological factors may also affect the progress of students with low vision in learning to read Braille. Exposure to blind people who use Braille efficiently may help to alleviate some of the fears and negative attitudes associated with Braille. Students with low vision may or may not need instruction in reading process depending on their prior success with visual reading. Students who have been successful in visual reading may need only to learn the Braille code as a means of reading. Several materials exist for teaching Braille to older students or adults. Each has advantages and disadvantages, and the same program will not work for every student. Encouraging family members to learn Braille is another way of reinforcing students' motivation to learn. The ability to read and write Braille provides family members the opportunity to assist students with their schoolwork as well as to correspond when they are away from home. It also demonstrates to the student that Braille is important enough for family members to learn it and is therefore worth using. Mentoring is also another important aspect. Mentoring is another way of encouraging students during the process of learning to read in Braille. Exposure to a blind adult who uses Braille regularly shows the student that Braille is normal and a respectable and efficient method of reading. Sources of recreational material. There are a number of organizations which provide reading material in Braille appropriate for children. Many of these sources also provide materials for adolescents and adults. Worldwide web-based resources may be of interest to students who have access to Braille displays or embossers. The International Braille Research Center has launched a project which provides electronic copies of books translated into Braille format using the Braille translator. The files can be imported into a Braille note taker or read on a computer with a Braille display. To conclude, there are several methods of teaching reading in Braille. The selection of which method to use depends on factors such as amount of time the child is able to work with, availability and accessibility of materials, and individual needs of the student. Often the best method involves combining elements of various methods to create a program which best fits the student's needs. Thank you students for your kind attention.